Petri Wine brings you Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce in the new adventures of Sherlock Holmes. The Petri family, the family that took time to bring you good wine, invite you to listen to Dr. Watson tell us another exciting adventure he shared with his old friend, that master detective, Sherlock Holmes. And as for me, well, I'd like to talk about those few minutes you have while you're waiting for dinner every evening. That's the perfect time for a glass of Petri California Sherry. Petri Sherry is the best beginning a good meal ever had. You really feel like you're enjoying the good things of life when you take time for a glass of Petri Sherry. Hold that glass of sherry to the light. Look at it. It's a beautiful dark amber. Yes, and Petri Sherry is clear and fragrant, the way a good wine should be. Now taste it. You've got something. That Petri Sherry has a real heart-of-the-grape flavor. Oh, and look, if you like your sherry dry, not sweet, Petri makes a fine dry sherry. It's called Petri Pale Dry. And if you don't know yet which you prefer, the regular sherry or the dry, why not try both? Don't buy one, buy two. But just be sure you always buy Petri. And now let's look in on our old friend, Dr. Watson. I'm sure he's expecting us. Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening, Mr. Bartell. Draw up your usual chair. Now get on with tonight's new Sherlock Holmes adventure.
Well, how did the story begin, Doctor?
It was one day in the autumn of 1887, I remember. Holmes and I were seated on either side of the fire in our Baker Street lodgings. The great man, his eyes half closed, his long, thin fingers pressed together, lay back in his chair, filling the room with large blue clouds of tobacco smoke, and discoursing on one of his favorite subjects, Professor Moriarty. I can almost hear him now, Mr. Bartell, as he said...
Napoleon of crime, Watson, is the organizer of half that is evil and is nearly all that is undetected in this great metropolis.
Oh, surely that's an exaggeration,
No, it
Holmes.
isn't, my dear fellow. He has a brain of the first order, and his agents are numerous and splendidly organized. He himself sits motionless like a spider in the center of his web. But that web has 1,000 radiations, and he knows every quiver of each one of them. It's fortunate for me that there's only one Moriarty. If every criminal were equally astute, I'd be in bankruptcy within the year.
I don't think you need to worry about bankruptcy, Holmes. As I came in just now, I picked these letters up from the whole table and slipped them into my pocket. Here you are.
Oh, thanks, old chap.
They didn't look like bills to me. I observed the crest of the Duke of Carlisle on the top envelope.
Oh, yeah, indeed. 500 guineas. His Grace is extremely generous in his evaluation of my services.
I don't agree. After all, you did save him from a shocking scandal.
Oh, listen to this, Watson.
I seen you yesterday when you come to the cricket match. You wasn't watching the cricket. If you value your life, keep your filthy long nose to yourself.
And it's I'm Joe the Butcher.
Long nose. Who on earth? Joe the Butcher.
Oh, minor criminal that I was instrumental in sending to prison for a short term. He flatters himself, though. I was watching the cricket. No idea that Joe was back in practice again. I must keep an eye on him. No. Letter on Carlton Hotel stationery. Now, I say, this is interesting. Very interesting.
Oh, what's it say, Holmes?
Dear Mr. Holmes, I've been informed that you are a man of ability and discretion. My life is in grave danger, and I need your help. Upon receipt of this letter, come to my hotel at once. I shall be expecting you. And it's signed, Francois Dulac.
Oh, it's rather peremptory, isn't it? No, please, just come to my hotel at once. Who is this Dulac, anyway?
Watson, old fellow.
Yeah?
We were talking of Moriarty just now. I have a feeling that this letter may lead us to him.
Well, what makes you say that?
Francois Dulac, the writer of this letter, is recognized in France as the one indisputable authority on the paintings of Jean-Baptiste Greuze.
Well, I still don't see the connection with Moriarty.
If there is one thing Moriarty loves, more than the dazzling abstractions of mathematics and even more dazzling achievements of crime, it is the paintings of Greuze. The suggested combination of impending danger and a Greuze expert spells Moriarty to me. Get your hat and coat, old fellow. We're off to the Carlton Hotel to see Monsieur Dulac at once.
This is room 212, all right, but there's no answer.
I'll knock again.
Shall I go and get someone to unlock the door?
No, old chap.
Huh?
Don't want to attract attention to our prospective client. Hotel locks shouldn't be very hard to pick. Here. The skeleton key should do the trick quite easily.
Well, the man at the desk downstairs said that Mr. Dulac was in his room.
No, Watson. He said he thought he was in his room. Uh-huh. Easier than I anticipated. Come on, let's go in.
Doesn't look as if anyone's occupying this room. No signs of any personal belongings.
No clothes hanging in the wardrobe, no luggage.
Yeah, yet he is still registered here.
Hello. What's this stain on the carpet by the bed here?
Great Scott, is it...
It's a blood stain, Watson.
Blood stain?
And the stain is still damp. I'm afraid we're too late. Come on. We can do no more good here.
You're not giving up, Holmes?
No, of course not, my dear fellow. Let's see what we can find out from the hotel manager. I refuse to believe that in the 19th century a distinguished foreigner can vanish into thin air.
Yes, Monsieur Dulac did have a visitor early on today, Mr. Holmes.
You remember his name?
I think it was Perkins or Parsons, but I'm not sure.
Can you describe his appearance?
I think so, Mr. Holmes. He was a very tall gentleman, tall and thin, with deep-sunk eyes.
Clean-shaven?
Oh, yes, sir. He had a high forehead and a funny way of moving his head from side to side.
Oh, yes.
By Joe, Holmes, that's almost an exact description of Moriarty.
Exactly, Watson. Have you seen Monsieur Dulac since this Mr. Perkins or Parsons called on him?
No, I haven't, sir. But his visitor came back only an hour ago. He had some men with him. They carried some odd packages out of the hotel.
Packages? But not luggage, eh?
No, packages, Mr. Holmes.
Has Monsieur Dulac received any other visitors since he arrived here?
None that had been here to see him, sir. But I understand that Sir Henry Davenant has been most anxious to get in touch with him.
Sir Henry Davenant? Thank you. I'm extremely obliged to you. Come on, Watson.
Always proud to be of service to Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
The plot begins to clear, Watson.
Well, what makes you say that, huh?
Sir Henry Davenant is a millionaire whose art collection is world famous. A year ago, the papers were full of his latest acquisition, the gem of his collection, Jean-Baptiste Greu's painting, Young Girl with a Gazelle. And now it would appear that for some reason Moriarty wishes to prevent a meeting between Sir Harry Davenant and Monsieur Dulac, a Greu's expert. Now, do you see why the plot begins to clear?
Vaguely, but what are you going to do?
Davenant is said to be something of a hermit. He won't have anything to do with officials, interviewers, and people like that. But we know that he wishes to consult an expert on the paintings of Jean-Baptiste Greu's. The next move should be obvious, old chap.
Gracious me, you mean that you'll impersonate one?
Certainly. If a Greu's expert is what he wants, then a Greu's expert is what he's going to get.
Holmes, I must say your disguise is amazingly effective.
Monsieur, you do me the great honor. If I appear convincing to the astute Dr. Watson, how can I fail to convince Sir Henry Davenant?
Oh, my dear fellow, it's marvelous. Appallingly good.
Yeah. Here we are, sir. Sir Henry's house. Let's hope for the best, old fellow.
I don't know exactly what a French art expert looks like, but I could certainly believe that you were one. I only hope that I can be equally convincing in the role of a patron of the arts.
You certainly look your part, old chap.
Good afternoon. Can I help you?
My name is Vernet. André Vernet. I am most anxious to make the acquaintance of Sir Henry Davenant.
I'm afraid that Sir Henry is extremely difficult to see, sir. I can tell him you're here, but he very rarely gives interviews.
That is a great disappointment to me. Perhaps you would just go and tell him I am a pupil and a disciple of the great François Dulac.
I will do what I can, sir. Come in, won't you, gentlemen? If you'll wait here for a moment, I'll take your message. What was the name again,
Vernet,
sir?
André Vernet, and this gentleman is Mr. Watson.
Very good, sir.
Well, we got into the house. Now let's hope that you can impress the master of it.
Now, there's easier task, I fear, old fellow. I've had to match opinions on the paintings of Greu's with an expert. My own knowledge of the subject is somewhat sketchy, I'm afraid.
Yes, and mine is absolutely nil.
Greu's was a naturalistic painter who flourished at the close of the 18th century, and though his paintings command a fabulous fee in this day and age, he himself died in great poverty.
Someone's coming.
Monsieur Vernet, will you and Mr. Watson come with me, please? Sir Henry is most anxious to meet you.
Merci, mademoiselle.
My name is Violet Jackson. I look after Sir Henry's art collection.
Indeed, a very pleasurable job, I'm sure, my dear. From what I hear, he has a magnificent gallery.
He has one of the finest in the world.
Yes.
His latest acquisition is the famous young girl with the Gazelle by Quers. Oh, but I'm sure you know all about that, Monsieur Vernet. I think you said in your message you were a student of the great Dulac.
I have that inestimable privilege, mademoiselle.
Oh, this is Sir Henry's study.
Thank you, Violet. You may go.
Yes, Sir Henry.
You're Vernet, I'm sure, and this is Mr. Watson?
That's right, Sir Henry. Mr. Vernet is staying with me.
I see. Well, sit down, won't you? Look, Vernet, you're a friend of Dulac, aren't you?
I think I may claim that honor, monsieur.
Then why in thunder can't I get in touch with him? He's staying at the Carlton Hotel, isn't he?
He was, or has been staying there, monsieur. Oui.
I've left half a dozen messages for him asking him to come and see me, and he hasn't answered one of them. I can't understand it. It's most important that I see him.
Monsieur is in some trouble, perhaps?
Perhaps. Now, you fellows are familiar with the painting by Greuze, the young lady with the Gazelle, aren't you?
Oh, yes, Sir Henry. Yes, indeed.
Oh, you are, eh? What do you think of it?
Well,
one of the greatest works, in my humble opinion, monsieur. Of course, I have only seen a reproduction, but it seemed to me to have a freshness of the of the flesh tints, a great firmness and brilliance of line. You are indeed fortunate to own it, monsieur.
Don't know about fortunate. It cost me £40,000.
I still say you are most fortunate, monsieur. Would you grant me the honor of to examine the original?
Well, I don't know whether I ought to. I've had to guard it very carefully ever since this... but perhaps in your case I can make an exception.
You received threats regarding the painting, Sir Henry?
Yes, I have, Mr. Watson. And they've worried me so much that I've even thought of engaging the services of a private detective.
Oh, indeed, monsieur. How very interesting.
The Duke of Carlisle strongly recommended a fellow by the name of Sherlock Holmes. I was seriously thinking of going to him.
Instead of which...
He has come to you, Sir Henry. In fact, it will save us all a lot of time, I'm sure.
Well, what kind of horseplay is this, sir? Who the devil are you?
My name is Sherlock Holmes.
Then why do you come here masquerading as a French artist?
Because I'd heard of your aversion to giving interviews, and I wanted to see you urgently. I thought that in the character of a supposed Greuze expert, I was most likely to gain immediate admission.
Well, then, your friend here?
Dr. Watson, my colleague.
Well, it's all turned out for the best, Sir Henry. You wanted to consult Mr. Holmes, and he was most anxious to see you.
Yes. Well, I'm glad you fellows are here. You see, I'm devilish worried about that Greuze of mine.
Oh, why, Sir Henry?
Well, I bought it at an auction. But there was another man bidding against me all the time, and when it was finally knocked down in my name, he became most insulting. He seemed unable to bear not owning the picture himself. He told me bluntly that I wouldn't enjoy it long. Well, I didn't think much about it at the time, but lately I've been receiving postcards repeating the threat. I don't like it, that's a fact.
Well, you kept those postcards, I hope, Sir Henry?
No, threw them in the fire where they belong.
Oh, that's pity, sir. Can you recall the name of this bidder at the auction who threatened you?
No, didn't know his name.
Can you describe his appearance?
Well, let me see. He was tall, clean-shaven, and a curious habit of moving his head from side to side.
Moriarty again.
Yes, old chap, my supposition was correct. Now, tell me, Sir Henry, is the painting safely guarded?
Well, I'd say that it was impregnable, Holmes. It's not in my regular galleries. I had a special strong room built for it when I started to receive these threats. It has a lock to which only I know the combination, and a special clockwork device that so controls the room that even I can only enter it during certain daytime hours.
And yet, Sir Henry, with such thorough precautions, you appear to be frightened. Why?
Well, I hardly dare trust my own shadow, Holmes. Well, as you possibly know, one of Greuze's pupils, a certain Madame Ledoux, imitated his paintings most successfully. Several of the experts were fooled. I confess that I've been frightened lately, since I received the threats, that a clever man might try and substitute a fake painting for the original, if indeed he hasn't already done so. That's why I was so anxious to get in touch with Dulac. He'd know a fraud at once.
But a substitution would be impossible if you're the only one that knows the combination to the lock of the strong room.
Well, that's what my logic tells me too, Doctor. And yet I'm very uneasy, I must confess.
It's still daylight, Sir Henry. Would it be possible for us to examine the painting now?
Well, certainly. By the way, what happened to Francois Dulac? Did he leave the Carlton Hotel?
He did, sir. So the circumstances of his departure made us distinctly uneasy.
In what way?
His room was empty. There were no signs of luggage, and yet...
Come in. Yes, Violet, what is it?
This note was just left for you, Sir Henry. I was asked to deliver it at once.
Who left it, Violet?
Well, he didn't give his name, Sir Henry. But he was a tall, thin man with deep, sunk eyes.
Oh. What's the note say?
Wait, it's the same fellow again. Listen to this. I told you you wouldn't enjoy the painting for long. You didn't, did you?
Great Scott, it's Moriarty.
Holmes, I don't see anything funny about this. What makes you laugh? It's obvious that my painting has been stolen.
I find nothing funny about it either, Sir Henry, but I must admit a certain pleasure. Once again, I'm crossing swords with an adversary who was more than worthy of my seal.
You'll hear the rest of Dr. Watson's story in just a second, so I'm just going to remind you that Petri Sherry could really be called the all-round, all-American wine. That's right, Petri California Sherry. Now, the reason I say that is because Petri Sherry is not only a swell before dinner wine, but it's a perfect wine for almost any occasion. When company drops in, serve Petri Sherry. After dinner, when you're just sitting around chatting, Petri Sherry again is just right. Believe me, you couldn't ask for a better all-round wine than Sherry. You couldn't ask for a better tasting Sherry than Petri. Petri Sherry. Well, Dr. Watson, you've kept me on the edge of my chair so far with your story. What happened next? Did Sir Henry Davenant take you to see his famous painting?
He did, Mr. Bartell. Together with Miss Violet Jackson, we descended countless flights of stairs. Doors opened where no one expected a door to exist. Finally, after walking down a narrow stone staircase that turned and twisted, we came up against a blank wall. It seemed that we could go no further. But a time clock, a combination of numbers, and a hidden door slid back. We stood in the interior of a small room. A room with no windows and hardly any light. An oil painting stood on an easel before it. It was incomparable Greuze's painting of a young girl with a gazelle. We stood looking at it for a brief moment, and then the Henry Davenant said,
Heaven, the painting is still safe.
Yes, Sir Henry. If it still is the same painting,
It looks the same, Mr. Holmes.
yes, it does to me.
the fact remains that only Francois Dulac could tell us if it is the same or a brilliant copy.
Yes, and Mr. Dulac has been silent.
So it would seem. Of course, we could ask the experts at the British Museum to pass judgment.
Yeah, but how could it have been stolen? It'd be impossible to smuggle it out of here and replace it with a copy.
There's only one way of being absolutely certain. With your permission, Sir Henry, I should like to make a test.
You're going to take a sample of the paint, Mr. Holmes?
Yes, that should give us certain proof.
Well, very well. Yeah, you'd better do it, Violet. But be careful. Remember, the painting cost me £40,000.
A minute fragment of paint will be sufficient for the test, won't it, Mr. Holmes?
Yes, indeed.
With my fingernails, Sir Henry, I'll scratch off a tiny sample.
Firstly, I think it's a dash fine bit of work, whoever painted it.
There you are, Mr. Holmes. Is that enough paint
Splendid,
for
Miss
you?
Jackson, splendid. Thank you. Please put it on this envelope for me, will you? That's it. And now, Sir Henry, I shall return to Baker Street and analyze this paint. Within an hour, I shall be able to tell you whether the painting is worth £40,000 or a plugged farthing.
Well, Holmes, did you make the test?
I did, Sir Henry.
And?
I'm afraid there's no doubt that your painting is a fraud.
Oh, fraud.
The sample of paint that I examined was manufactured not more than 25 years ago, and Greuze died in 1805.
Well, I still say that it's a fine painting, whoever did it. I wouldn't mind having it myself.
I agree, Dr. Watson. In fact, I'd be glad to buy it. It's a brilliant copy, and more than likely it was done by Madame Ledoux.
You're remarkably quiet, Sir Henry.
£40,000. £40,000.
No, sir, put that knife down. Holmes, help me grab him.
Don't worry, gentlemen. I'm not about to commit suicide in despair, if that's what you're thinking.
Now, why are you grasping that knife, sir?
Because I have work to do in my strong room. I'm going to use this knife to smash that lying canvas into 40,000 pieces. Yes, well, I suppose you're right, Violet. It's childish to mutilate this daub.
It's a brilliant fraud, Sir Henry. I'd like to have it. I'll buy it from you gladly.
Buy it from me? You can have it. Go and make arrangements to have the wretched thing taken away at once. I don't want any frauds in my collection.
Yes, Sir Henry, and thank you.
Now, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I'll pay you any fee you name if you can tell me how the original painting was stolen.
Well, Sir Henry, the how must here precede the who. And the how, I must confess, seems impossible.
Yes, I agree. This is a sealed metal room. The only entrance is through the door. That has a combination that only you know, Sir Henry.
Perfectly true. It's impossible for anyone to enter this room without my being present. Or I would have sworn it was.
Let's examine these walls, Watson. That's your secret panel. Ventilator. No method of entrance here.
Well, you'll find no flaws, I'm sure. This room is built like a giant safe. And the time lock on the door is equally solid.
Is the time lock working now?
Yes, it started 5 minutes ago when we opened the door. But don't worry, it's perfectly safe with the door open.
But when the door's closed, it couldn't be reopened again, I take it, Sir Henry.
Not until the morning, Doctor, no. I had the lock specially designed.
Very ingenious. This presents as pretty a problem as ever I've tackled, Sir Henry. A large painting stolen and a fake one substituted in a sealed room to which only you have access. I must confess the how seems utterly impossible.
Remember what you always say, Holmes. Throw out the impossible, and whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the possible.
Let's consider the who for a moment. Is your butler absolutely reliable?
Absolutely.
How about Miss Jackson?
Oh, completely trustworthy. Brought letters of recommendation from most of the leading art galleries in London. Intelligent, too. And serious-minded. She's made a deep study of mathematics as well as her knowledge of painting.
Mathematics? How do you know that, Sir Henry?
Well, she had a book with her the other day. I was surprised that the title could have been a novel, but no. It was called The Dynamics of an Asteroid, and it was inscribed to her by the author.
Dynamics of an Asteroid, and inscribed to her by the author. Thank heavens for your memories, Henry. That book was written by Professor Moriarty. Violet Jackson must be an accomplice of his.
Violet?
The door! Someone slammed it shut.
Yes, and it's not very hard to guess who that someone is.
Oh, but I can't believe that Violet is a...
Look, there's a note being pushed under the door.
Strike a match, will you, old fellow?
Right, sure. What's it say, Holmes?
Forgive my unladylike eavesdropping, but with Mr. Sherlock Holmes as near the truth as he is, I'm afraid it would be unwise for me to remain here any longer. On the other hand, you are in no danger of smothering in the strong room, but your imprisonment should delay my pursuit till morning. Violet Jackson.
He's escaped us, Holmes.
Don't worry, Watson. Miss Jackson's failure to procure the painting for Moriarty will land her in a far worse dilemma than anything we could subject her to. Moriarty has never tolerated failure on the part of his minions. A brilliant plot, old fellow, a brilliant plot. Moriarty is at the zenith of his powers. How fortunate that we were able to foil him.
What do you mean, foil him? My painting's been stolen.
Your painting, Sir Henry? Oh, no. It's here in this room.
What on earth are you talking about, Holmes?
You reminded me of my own dictum, Watson. I discarded the impossible. It was impossible that the picture had been stolen, therefore it had not been stolen.
You mean that this painting is the original, Grove?
Yes, of course, sir. Surely the whole plot is crystal clear now.
Just about as clear as porridge to me.
Well, then, let me explain. The whole episode of Francois Dulac, the note to me, the empty hotel room, and the significant bloodstains and the apparent disappearance of Dulac were all part of Moriarty's plot. The real Dulac never left France. Moriarty created him in England to lure me into the case.
Why in thunder should he want to do that, Holmes?
Yes. I should think you're the last person he'd want on the scene.
Oh, on the contrary, sir. He knew that I'd grab at his bait, the apparent murder of a Grove expert who would make it seem likely that your painting had a substitute, Sir Henry. He wanted me to test the painting, which I did. I fell into his trap very neatly.
The paint, Holmes. You said that it was no more than 20 years old.
Yes, my dear fellow, the answer should be obvious.
I see it. Violet was his accomplice, had prepared the painting beforehand, and carefully scraped off a piece of modern paint.
Exactly, Sir Henry. And Moriarty had assumed, quite correctly as it turned out, that as soon as you thought your painting was a fraud, you'd want to get rid of it.
And that girl was going to take it out of this house with your full approval. And, of course, turn it over to Moriarty. What a fantastic scheme.
A devilishly clever one, old chap. If it hadn't been for your chance remark about the book on mathematics, Sir Henry, I'm very much afraid the young lady with the Gazelle Might even now be on our way out of your house.
Holmes, I can't tell you how grateful I am. And I'm going to express that gratitude in a very material manner, I assure you.
Thank you, Sir Henry, but I wouldn't dream of accepting a fee for this case. I've been shockingly obtuse. I might easily have let them walk away with your treasure right under our noses.
We locked in here for the night, then?
I'm very much afraid so, Dr. Watson. Oh, I shouldn't be surprised if the butler notices our disappearance and comes looking for us. But he won't be able to open the door. It'll need a professional locksmith to get us out of here.
Oh, really? It looks as if we'll spend a very cheerful evening.
Don't be gloomy, my dear fellow.
Oh, gloomy.
You're locked in with one of the loveliest girls in history, and she's genuine at that. Strike another match, old chap, shall we? What? Let's look at her once again.
Doctor, that was not only a swell story, but I really learned something.
Oh, good, Mr. Bartell. And just what did you learn?
Well, this fellow Gruz, the painter...
Yes?
I know this must sound stupid to you, but until you mentioned his name, I'd never heard of him before.
Holmes mentioned his name to me. I've never heard him before either. But then... we'll never learn about the good things in this world unless somebody tells us.
Exactly. That's the way I feel about Petri wine.
Oh, no. Wait a minute.
Now, here's the way I look at it. There are thousands of people who know about Petri wine and love it, right?
Yes,
but even though it's a wonderful wine, there must be some people who don't know about it. So I tell them about it. And I tell them about the Petri family and how they've been making wine for generations and how they've been handing on down from father to son, the fine art of turning luscious grapes into delicious wine. Yes, and when I tell them that the name Petri on a bottle of wine is the personal assurance of the Petri family that every drop of wine in that bottle is good wine, well, that's all you have to know. So it adds up to this. If you want a fine wine for any occasion, you want a Petri wine, because Petri took time to bring you good wine. Tonight's Sherlock Holmes adventure was written by Dennis Green and Anthony Boucher and was suggested by an incident in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's story, The Final Problem. Music is by Dean Foxler. Mr. Rathbone appears through the courtesy of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and Mr. Bruce through the courtesy of Universal Pictures, where they are now starring in the Sherlock Holmes series. The Petri Wine Company of San Francisco, California, invites you to tune in again next week, same time, same station. Sherlock Holmes comes to you from our Hollywood studio. This is Harry Bartell saying goodnight for the Petri family. This is the Mutual Broadcasting System. Petri Wine brings you Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce in the new adventures of Sherlock Holmes. The Petri family, the family that took time to bring you good wine, invite you to listen to Dr. Watson tell us another exciting adventure he shared with his old friend, that master detective, Sherlock Holmes. And right now, I'd like to just briefly mention an idea you ought to try tomorrow night, just before you sit down to dinner. Just pour yourself a glass of that good Petri California sherry. Petri sherry is the perfect before-dinner wine. Its cheerful, glowing amber color looks festive and, well, it sort of lends an air of importance to the occasion. And as for the wine itself, just taste it. That Petri sherry is not just ordinary wine, no, sir. One sip and you know that wonderful sun-ripened grapes went into its making. Yes, and you know that Petri sherry was carefully watched over every step of the way. Incidentally, Petri makes two kinds of sherry, regular sherry and Petri Pale Dry. If you're not sure just which kind you and your friends will like best, try them both. Don't buy one, buy two. But when it comes to sherry, or any other wine for that matter, be sure you always buy Petri. And now I'm certain our good friend Dr. Watson's waiting for us. Let's go in and join him.
Ah, there you are, Mr. Bartell. Punctual to the minute, as always.
Well, this is one doctor's appointment I'm eager to keep.
Nice of you to say so, my boy. Draw up your usual chair and make yourself comfortable.
Thanks. Well, Doctor, today's April the 1st. Did anyone try and play any jokes on you?
You did, Mr. Bartow, but I'm happy to say that nobody caught me. Not as in the story that I'm going to tell you tonight, but an April Fool's Day prank certainly scored a bullseye.
I see you have the dispatch box out again, Doctor. Been refreshing your memory?
Yes, I have, Mr. Bartow. And when I tell you the adventure took place at 1881, I think you'll agree that after such a lapse of time, a man can hardly rely on memory alone.
1881? Say, Doctor, tonight's adventure must have been one of the really early ones.
Yes, it was indeed. In fact, to be exact, it took place only a little while after Sherlock Holmes and I had first met and had taken up lodgings together.
How was the great detective in those early days?
It's a fine mystery to me, Mr. Bartow. To give you an example, my boy, I'd shared our Baker Street lodgings with him for over a month before I was even certain of his profession, the knowledge of which I learnt to my awe and astonishment when our first adventure together took place.
Oh, that was the one you called a study in scarlet, wasn't it, Doctor?
That's right, Mr. Bartow. The memory you've got. Scholar. But even after that adventure, I found myself wondering at times what I had let myself in for, sharing lodgings with such a strange companion. It was in one of those moods of doubt and confusion that my story begins. Late one March evening, I found myself in the neighborhood of Piccadilly Circus. It was cold, and a steady drizzle of rain had dampened my spirits. I thought that a glass of wine and the sound of music would put me in a better mood. And so, Mr. Bartell, I entered the Criterion restaurant. As I sat with a glass of rare vintage port at my elbow, the orchestra playing a dreamy Strauss waltz in the background, I couldn't help thinking of the last time that I'd been there. It was the night I met a young medical student by the name of Stanford. He was the man who first introduced me to Sherlock Holmes. Suddenly, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, and to my amazement, once again, young Stanford was standing before me.
Watson, or should I say Dr. Watson. How are you, my dear chap?
Hello, Stanford. Come and sit down.
Thanks. I'm glad to see that you're not holding any grudge against me
Why on earth should I do that?
for introducing you to Sherlock Holmes. I've reproached myself ever since. I think he's as mad as a hatter.
Not at all. He may be eccentric. In fact, I'll admit that he is eccentric, but he's an extraordinarily interesting fellow. He'll make a great name for himself as a private detective one of these days. You'll see if I'm not right, Stanford.
I saw something about him in the paper the other day.
Yes, I expect that was the Lauriston Gardens affair, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
He's a brilliant man, Stanford. Quite brilliant. So I must admit he's difficult at times. He works like a fiend as a rule, but occasionally overacts and sets in for days at a time. He'll lie on our sofa, hardly uttering a word or moving a muscle from morning to night. It's depressing, I must say.
I think he takes himself too seriously.
Yes, that's your right.
How would you like to join in a little plot?
Potter, against Holmes?
Yes, just a rag, you know. We thought it'd be rather fun.
We?
Murphy and I, we were just talking about it. I'll call him over. Murphy?
Oh, is that Murphy? I've seen him before somewhere, haven't I?
I'm sure you must have done. He's been round at the hospital, and any time you go into the British Museum, you'll find him there. Nice fella, but dull. Definitely dull.
Yes, Stamford.
Oh, this is a friend of mine, John Watson. This is James Murphy.
How do you do? I think I've seen you at the hospital.
And I know I've seen you, Dr. Watson.
Oh, sit down and come and join us, won't you?
Oh, thank you very much.
I was just telling Watson about our little plot.
Oh, you mean about Sherlock Holmes?
Now, look here. I'd like you fellows to realize that Holmes is a very good friend of mine.
Oh, don't worry, Watson. This is all in good fun. Don't you realize what the date is tomorrow?
1st of April, isn't it?
Yes, April Fool's Day.
Oh, now I see. You're going to play an April Fool's Day joke on Holmes.
Yes, that's our plan.
Well, it's hardly our plan, Stamford. It's really Lady Anne Partington's idea. You see, Holmes was very rude to her when she visited the hospital recently, and she wants to, take him down a peg or two.
Sounds innocent enough, but I must say he's inclined to be rather arrogant at times. Well, what's the plan?
Well, we'll need your help, Watson. You must be careful not to give the joke away. I'll bet you a $5 that Holmes falls for the whole story, hook, line, and sinker. Now, here's exactly what we're planning to do. Lady Anne is going to call on Holmes at Baker Street in the morning.
Lady Anne, I'm very flattered that you called to see me in my professional capacity.
Surely, my dear man, you didn't think this was a social call. You were much too rude to me at the hospital the other day for that.
That was the point I was trying to make. Please sit down, won't you?
Take this chair, won't you, Lady Anne? It's by far the most comfortable chair in the room.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Watson.
And now, what can I do to help you?
You've heard of the Elphinstone Emerald?
Oh, yes, indeed. A magnificent stone of very considerable value. An heirloom in your family, I believe.
Yes, Mr. Holmes. I keep it in a wall safe in my bedroom. This morning, when I had occasion to go to the safe, I discovered that the emerald had been stolen.
Stolen? Scott. Shocking business. Of course, you want Mr. Holmes to recover it for you.
A remarkable deduction, my dear doctor. Lady Anne, when you opened the safe, did you observe any signs of it having been tampered with?
Oh, I think it's rather stupid to sit and answer questions here in Baker Street. Why don't you come over to my house in Cavendish Square and examine the safe for yourself? You are a detective, aren't you?
Lady Anne, just now you accused me of rudeness. I assure you that mine, at least, was unintentional.
Oh, come, Holmes. Don't be so touchy.
I can promise you a substantial fee, Mr. Holmes.
I'm a struggling practitioner in a new profession, eh? My poverty, but not my will, consents.
I pay thy poverty, and not thy will. You see, I can quote my Shakespeare, too, Mr. Holmes. My carriage is waiting, gentlemen. Let's drive over to Cavendish Square at once, shall we? This is the wall safe, Mr. Holmes.
Not too difficult a safe to crack for an expert. You placed the emerald in it last night, you say?
Yes, when I went to bed. And this morning, it had gone.
Well, surely, Holmes, this is a good occasion to use that magnifying glass that you're always fitting about.
Excellent occasion, my dear doctor. That's why I brought it with me. Uh-huh. That's very interesting.
What is it?
This safe was opened by an expert. There isn't a sign of it having been forced. Hello.
What have you discovered?
There's a peculiar tarnish on the steel knob. It was obviously handled by someone whose fingers are habitually stained with chemicals.
Amazing, Holmes.
Elementary, my dear doctor. Where does that door lead to?
My boudoir.
I should like to examine it, if I may.
Oh, but of course.
Thank you, Lady Anne.
Dr. Watson, this is the most beautiful April Fool's Day fraud I've ever played.
I say, Murphy was right. He has fallen for it. Hook, line, and sinker. Just the same, I'm beginning to feel guilty. I can't help feeling a bit disloyal.
Oh, nonsense. It's all in fun.
Are Stamford and Mr. Murphy listening?
Yes, they're next door in my drawing room. I'm sure their ears are positively glued to the keyhole.
Well, I do hope Holmes won't be angry with me.
Here it comes.
Nothing of any interest in there. The windows haven't been tampered with. We may presume, therefore, that the thief did not enter by an upstairs window. Lady Anne.
Yes, Mr. Holmes.
This room has not been touched since you discovered your loss?
Oh, no. I told the servants to leave it exactly as it was while I came to fetch you.
Splendid, splendid. Deep pile carpet, eh? Could you get that up? The thief was a tall man with a long stride.
Oh, come, Holmes. I know your methods, but there aren't any footprints on this carpet that you can identify, even with your magnifying glass.
My dear doctor, I've studied many crimes, and I've never seen one yet that was committed by a flying creature. As long as a criminal remains on his two legs, there must be some trifling displacement can be detected by a keen observer. I assure you that the marks on this carpet indicate that the thief was a tall man with a long stride. This is a tobacco ash. Pipe tobacco. Stag tobacco that sells at 4p an ounce.
Now, really, Mr. Holmes, how can you possibly identify an individual tobacco?
Oh, it's a hobby of mine. In fact, I've even written a monograph on the subject. Now, one more look at the safe itself. Hello. What's this powdered dust? What? It's rosin. Trace of rosin. Lady Anne, I suggest you get in touch with Scotland Yard at once.
You mean that you've solved it, Holmes?
I mean, my dear doctor, that I can give you a reasonably complete picture of the thief, and that picture is so individual that I'd be surprised if it would fit more than one man in London.
But this is pure magic, Mr. Holmes. Please describe him to me.
Well, he's a tall man. The width of his stride indicates that, and he's thin.
Well, what enables you to tell that, Holmes?
His footprints have made a remarkably light indentation on the mat of the carpet. Our thief dabbles extensively in chemicals, as indicated by the tarnishing of the knob on the safe, and the traces of rosin would suggest that he plays the violin also. He smokes shag tobacco, has a great practical knowledge of the ways of combination locks, and he's obviously in close contact with the criminal classes.
How do you know that, Mr. Holmes?
Well, he wouldn't steal a famous stone unless he knew how to dispose of it through some trustworthy fence.
Yes, it's a very comprehensive picture, Holmes. I almost feel if I knew the chap.
Thank you, Doctor. I'm sure there's only one man in London, and it shouldn't be hard to trace him.
I agree entirely, Mr. Holmes. Dr. Watson, I think the joke has gone far enough.
Joke? What do you mean?
You're quite right, Holmes, in saying there's only one such man in London. You've just given a perfect description of yourself.
April Fool. Dr. Stamford, Mr. Murphy, you can come in now.
April Fool, Holmes.
April Fool.
April Fool.
Into the drawing room, everyone. Let us drink a glass of wine to Mr. Holmes, who has so graciously forgiven us for the little trick we played on him. And also to Dr. Stanford, who thought of the whole idea.
No hard feelings, Holmes.
Oh, no, Doctor. No, it was a rather embarrassing experience.
Murphy told me about the plan. I just couldn't resist joining him.
Ah, here you are, Holmes. Here's a drink.
Thank you, Stanford.
You know Murphy, don't you?
No, I don't think we've met. How do you do, sir?
How do you do, Holmes? How did you like the little game we played on you?
It was rather a salutary experience. I suppose you gave them all the details to build up the picture of me, eh, Doctor?
Yes, I did, Holmes, and knowing some of your methods, we tried to plant every clue that you'd pick up.
Very neat job, too, and incidentally, a perfect example of the dangers of deductions based on purely circumstantial evidence. I shall profit from this little lesson.
I must say it was worth a fortune in emeralds to see your face, Holmes, when you realized what you'd done.
Well, the joke's over now. By the way, where is Lady Anne?
I believe she said she was going to fetch the Elphinstone emerald. She thought you might be interested in seeing it.
She probably feels the sight of it will salve my wounded vanity.
Oh, here she comes now.
Mr. Holmes! Mr. Holmes!
What's wrong?
What's happened, Lady Anne?
The emerald. It's not where I hid it. This time it's really stolen.
Dr. Watson's story will continue in just a few seconds, so I've just time to remind you that there are many, many different types of wine. But if you want one wine that's fine for almost any occasion, then you want Petri California Sherry. Petri Sherry is fine before dinner, of course. But Petri Sherry is good after dinner, too. And it's the perfect wine for cocktail time or any time friends drop in. Everybody will love the real heart-of-the-grape flavor you get in every sip of Petri Sherry. And you can serve Petri Sherry proudly, because those letters P-E-T-R-I spell the proudest name in the history of American wine. Petri wine. Well, Dr. Watson, your April Fool's Day plot kind of backfired on you, didn't it?
Yes, Mr. Bartell, it was a perfect example of the biter bit.
Well, what happened next? I suppose Sherlock Holmes went into action once again.
That's Mr. Bartell, and it gladdened my heart to see the change in the fella. I confess I felt rather ashamed of my part in the prank, for I could see that Holmes's pride had been hurt. But now, with a definite crime before him, the difference was amazing. He suddenly became a dynamo, galvanized into action as he stood there, firing questions at the other members.
Lady Anne, who besides yourself knew of this fresh hiding place?
Both Murphy and I did.
Yes. After we left our deliberate clues on the safe, we went with Lady Anne and saw her secrete the emerald in the top drawer of her dressing table.
We thought it would be all right there. After all, as soon as the joke was over, I was going to put it back in the safe.
Now, I think our wisest plan before we question the servants would be for each one of you who were in this April Fool's Day prank to submit to being searched.
Holmes, surely you don't suggest that any one of us took the emerald?
No, Stanford, I don't. But if any one of you four are not guilty, this will be a splendid way of proving your innocence.
I say, steady, Holmes. You're not suggesting that Lady Anne stole her own emeralds, are you?
Are you, Mr. Holmes?
I'm suggesting nothing, but I may point out that the recent vogue for the insurance companies has provided another interesting motive for these so-called thefts.
I resent your insinuation. It's outrageous.
Lady Anne, if I'm to recover your emerald, I must at least consider every possibility. The search is the most immediate practical action. Perhaps you'll retire into the next room while I persuade these gentlemen to submit to being searched.
Very well, but I think you're in danger of making a fool of yourself once again.
No, wait, don't go, Lady Anne. The search won't be necessary.
What do you mean, Murphy?
I must throw myself on your mercy, Lady Anne. I confess that I stole the emerald.
Murphy!
After you put it in the drawer, Lady Anne, I slipped back into the room and took it out.
Murphy, that's a criminal action.
I know it, but I'm poor. I need money desperately for my mathematical research. I knew the emerald was priceless, and I couldn't resist the temptation to take advantage of a joke. Here, Lady Anne, here's the stone, and please don't prosecute me. Please don't. It'd be my ruin.
May I examine the emerald, Lady Anne? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Murphy, I won't pretend that I'm not deeply shocked. I must ask you to leave my house.
But you won't prosecute me, will you? It was a moment's temptation.
No, I won't prosecute you.
Holmes, what are you doing with the emerald?
Well, knowing something of the deceptive ways of thieves, I came on this case fully prepared to test the emerald when I found it. Now, a drop of this acid from this vial, so...
Mr. Holmes, what are you doing? You'll enter the stone.
No, not if it's a true emerald. Look at that.
Good Lord, the acid's eating to the stone as if it was sugar.
Then that means...
It means, Lady Anne, that Mr. Murphy has just imperiled his honor and his freedom to steal a singularly beautiful fake.
Mr. Holmes, this joke has turned into a nightmare. Is there no way of recovering my emerald?
I hope so, Lady Anne. I've been taking steps in their logical order. The servants have all been questioned. We've searched Mr. Stamford and Mr. Murphy.
Yes, most humiliating experience. Made me feel like a criminal.
Well, personally, I was only too thankful to submit to a search this time. I knew I had nothing to worry about.
You yourself, Lady Anne, you consented to being searched by the police matron that Holmes sent for?
Only because he threatened to send for the police if I didn't. But distasteful though it was, I'd rather endure that than have this story on the front pages of the newspapers.
And in spite of all these rather unfriendly proceedings, we've got exactly nowhere as regards finding the emerald.
No, Stamford, but we have at least eliminated the possibility that the thief is secreting the jewel on his person.
Still somewhere in these 2 rooms, eh, Holmes?
I think so, though there is one remaining possibility.
And that is?
That the fake stone was substituted for the real emerald sometime before all of you engineered your April Fool's Day joke.
Oh, no, Mr. Holmes, that's not possible. I know it was the genuine emerald I took out of the safe this morning.
How can you be sure? The substitute was an excellent imitation. Without a chemical test such as I performed, it would be hard to be certain.
I can tell you why I'm certain. Last night, Papa came to dinner and brought a Mr. Vanderleider of Amsterdam. He examined the stone. And you'll agree that a jewel expert like that couldn't be fooled.
That's true, Lady Anne. And what did you do with the emerald after Mr. Vanderleider left?
I locked it in my safe and went to bed.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't unlock the safe again until Dr. Stamford and Mr. Murphy came here this morning.
That settles it then. The real emerald is still hidden somewhere in these 2 rooms.
But where? That's the question.
I must say it's completely mystifying.
Well, let's go back to what we were all doing at the exact moment you came into the room, Lady Anne, and informed us of the loss of your stone. Now, we were
drinking a toast to you and...
That's it.
Lady Anne, hard thinking is, it's thirsty work.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me get you something. A glass of port, perhaps.
No, thank you. But I observe that you have a remarkably comprehensive assortment of liqueurs. I wonder if I might have a glass of creme de menthe.
Oh, of course. I'll get it for you.
Creme de menthe in the middle of the day, Holmes?
I knew you were eccentric, but this really
Holmes, this bottle, it clinked as I picked it up.
I thought it might, Lady Anne.
There's something inside.
Allow me, madam. Thank you. I'm sure you won't mind if I waste this liqueur on the aspidestra. So. Lady Anne, allow me to restore to you the Elphinstone Emerald.
Great Scott.
Amazing. Fantastic. Ingenious. The one safe hiding place in the room. Where could a green gem be more effectively hidden than in a bottle of green liqueur?
But who stole it? Who substituted the fake stone?
Frankly, I don't care. The gem is restored. That's all that matters. I prefer not to go to court. Neither you nor I, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, would show up in the best of lights. And my father would disapprove of this whole affair, I'm afraid.
Just as you wish, Lady Anne. In either case, I shall expect your check for my services in due course.
Here we are at the Criterion again, Stamford. Won't you come in and join us for lunch?
Thanks, Watson, but I'll keep the cab and go on. I actually have a patient this afternoon. A rare and delightful experience for a young doctor, as you probably know.
As rare and delightful as a client is for a young detective.
Yes.
I quite understand, and I'm correspondingly grateful to you for your profitable hope.
I'm glad it was profitable for you. Personally, I feel pretty stupid about the whole thing. Well, goodbye.
Goodbye, fella.
Goodbye. 39 Onslow Square, cabby.
You're remarkably quiet, Murphy.
Well, I'm afraid my conscience won't let me do much talking, Doctor. I'm heartily ashamed of myself. Well, thanks for the lift. I'll leave you, Captain.
Oh, nonsense. You'll join us for lunch, Murphy.
But,
No buts about it. I insist. Come on.
Well, awfully nice of you.
Oh, come, Murphy. Any one of us can make a foolish mistake. It's just lucky that you didn't have to pay for yours.
Monsieur wishes a table.
Yes, the 3, please.
This way, monsieur. Does this table please you?
Excellent, thank you.
George, I'm as hungry as a hunter. How about you, Murphy?
No, I'm afraid I have very little appetite. This whole case has upset me dreadfully.
You mustn't take it so much to heart, Murphy. By the way, Doctor, I'd like to have your opinion on the case. Who do you think staged the theft of the emerald today?
Perfectly obvious to me. Lady Anne Partington did it herself to collect insurance money. If she hadn't, she'd have insisted on your finding the thief. But you needn't worry, old chap. You get your fee all right, I'm sure of that.
Oh, I'm not worrying about the fee. But I assure you, Lady Anne did not engineer that fraud today.
You mean that it was Stamford?
Tell him who was responsible, my dear Murphy.
But how should I know?
Oh, come now, Murphy. Let's not fence any longer. You did an excellent job, a superlative job. I was almost sorry to spoil it for you.
I don't think I understand you, Holmes.
Oh, yes, you do, Murphy. You're a splendid actor, too. I was so deeply touched when you had apparently stolen a fake jewel, and all the time you knew that the real one was safely hidden in the bottle of creme de menthe, to be abstracted at your leisure. You scoundrel.
Holmes, do you mind telling me what's going on here? I'm completely and absolutely in the dark.
Surely it's obvious, my dear doctor. The imitation emerald was a brilliant copy.
What makes you so sure of that, my dear Holmes?
Because this April Fool's Day hoax was only conceived yesterday, or that is what you wish the others to believe. Such a superb paste gem could not have been made at such short notice. Therefore, it must have been prepared by someone who knew about the hoax before it was arranged. Now, my dear doctor, when Stamford told you about the plan last night, whose idea did he say it was?
He told me that it was Lady Anne Partington's plan.
Precisely. And yet Lady Anne referred to it today as Stamford's idea. Obviously, you, my dear Murphy, presented the plan to each as the notion of the other, and so only you could have arranged the real theft behind the hoax. I repeat, a splendid job.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. May I also compliment you on your cleverness in frustrating my plot?
Look here, what is all this? One of you is a criminal, the other is a detective. It's like throwing each other compliments as if you were in the same profession.
The dividing line between the criminal and the criminal investigator is thinner than you might imagine, my dear doctor.
How very true, my dear Holmes. Would you consider coming over to my side of the line? Together we'd make an unbeatable team.
Oh, you flatter me. Nevertheless, I must decline your offer, Mr. Murphy.
Oh, a pity. On your side of the line, you'll never be a rich man. By the way, for your edification, my name is not Murphy, though Stamford insists on thinking it is.
Then what is your name, you scoundrel?
Your friend says the word scoundrel so much better than you, Doctor. My name is Mercury.
Oh, indeed. Spelled M-U-R-T-R-Y?
No. Dear me, I have so much trouble with my name. People will either misspell it or mispronounce it. I'm afraid I'll have to begin calling it the way it looks. M-O-R-I-A-R-T-Y. Moriarty.
Moriarty. I shall remember that name. I have a feeling we shall meet again.
I trust that we shall. You've won the first round, Sherlock Holmes, I admit that. But I believe that a return match is indicated.
I shall look forward to it, Moriarty. And now, Doctor, I can't stand your baleful glare any longer. Let's order lunch, shall we?
I fear that was a pretty hectic April Fool's Day.
Yes, it was. I never want to see another one exactly like it.
I don't blame you. You know, I'd sure hate to have someone come to my house and pull a trick like that on me.
Why, Mr. Bartell, do you have a precious emerald you fear may be stolen?
Are you kidding? I wouldn't know the difference between a precious emerald and a piece of green glass. But when it comes to rubies, now that's something else.
Oh, you would know a ruby when you saw it?
Sure, because a ruby has exactly the same color as a glass of Petri California port held up to the light.
Mr. Bartell, you can find more excuses for talking about Petri wine than any man in the entire world. Believe me.
Excuses? I don't need an excuse to talk about Petri wine. Why, there's a wine that actually speaks for itself. If I may borrow a phrase from Shakespeare or somebody. There's no other wine quite like Petri wine because only Petri wine is made by the Petri family. And the Petri family has been making wine for generations. They've been handing down from father to son, years and years of knowledge and experience of the fine art of turning luscious grapes into clear, fragrant, delicious wine. Yes, and because the making of Petri wine is a family affair, those letters P-E-T-R-I on a bottle of wine are the personal assurance of the Petri family that every drop of wine in that bottle is good wine. You never miss with a Petri wine because Petri took time to bring you good wine. Well, Dr. Watson, what's the prescription for next week's
Well,
story?
next week, Mr. Bartell, I'm going to tell you a rather unusual story. It concerns a series of strange disappearances and a murder without apparent reason, and yet it was a case that Sherlock Holmes solved without ever meeting any of the suspects. I call it the singular affair of the disappearing scientist.
Well, I'm sure we'll all want to hear that one, Doctor.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, before you go, Mr. Bartell, I want to urge our friends that will do all they can to save on the use of all wheat and rice products, and also fats and oils. There are millions of families literally starving to death in Europe and Asia. We're not being asked to give them our food, but just being asked to take it easy on certain foods so that there will be some left for them to buy. I know there isn't one person listening to me tonight who would knowingly let anyone starve. And remember, unless you do help, thousands of little children will starve. So please, let's share a meal and save a life.
Tonight's Sherlock Holmes adventure was written by Dennis Green and Anthony Boucher and was suggested by an incident in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's story, A Study in Scarlet. Music is by Dean Fossler. Mr. Rathbone appears through the courtesy of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and Mr. Bruce through the courtesy of Universal Pictures, where they are now starring in the Sherlock Holmes series. The Petri Wine Company of San Francisco, California, invites you to tune in again next week, same time, same station. Sherlock Holmes comes to you from our Hollywood studio. This is Harry Bartell saying goodnight for the Petri family. For a solid hour of exciting mystery dramas, listen every Monday on most of these same stations at 8 o'clock to Michael Shayne, followed immediately by Sherlock Holmes. This is the Mutual Broadcasting System. Petri Wine brings you Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce in the new adventures of Sherlock Holmes. The Petri family, the family that took time to bring you good wine, invites you to listen to Dr. Watson tell us another exciting adventure he shared with his old friend, that master detective, Sherlock Holmes. And I'd like to ask you a short, simple question. Have you ever tried a glass of sherry before dinner? If you haven't, you'll never know what you're missing till you do. And make that sherry Petri California sherry. Because Petri sherry is the best beginning a good meal ever had. Just hold a glass of Petri sherry to the light. Look at its wonderful, clear amber color. Now just get a whiff of that aroma. Bouquet, the experts call it. I'm telling you, you can just smell those big, luscious grapes. Now, best of all, taste your Petri sherry. Sip it. Sip it slowly so you don't miss one single drop of this truly delicious wine. Yes, without a doubt, Petri sherry is good wine. Oh, and incidentally, Petri makes two kinds of sherry. Regular sherry and Petri pale dry. Both are fine. And if you're not sure which you might like best, do what I do. Don't buy one, buy two. Try them both. And serve them proudly because the name Petri is the proudest name in the history of American wine. And now I'm sure our good friend and host, Dr. Watson, is waiting, so let's go in and join him. Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening, Mr. Bartell. Here, quiet. Down, Monty. Down there.
Dogs seem very chipper tonight.
Tonight, yes, but they've been in disgrace most of the day, Mr. Bartell.
Oh? What have they been up to? After the seals again, Doctor?
No, my boy, this time it was chickens. They got into my neighbor's coop and had a delightful time. Fortunately, there were no casualties, but I'm afraid that my good neighbor policy has suffered a slight diplomatic strain. But you come here to listen to Sherlock Holmes' adventures, not those of my dog, so draw up your usual chair and make yourself comfortable, and I'll get on with tonight's story.
Last week, Doctor, you told us it was a case in which Sherlock Holmes found the solution without ever meeting any of the suspects.
That's quite correct, Mr. Bartell. As remarkable as an exhibition of long-distance detection as I ever recall. But judge the story for yourself, my boy. It was in the autumn of 1903, and Sherlock Holmes was about to retire to his bee farm on the Sussex Downs. I must confess, Mr. Bartell, that my heart was heavy during those last few weeks we spent at Baker Street. I thought of the countless adventures that we'd shared together. I remembered those many evenings of quiet comradeship and companionship. A fire blazing away on the hearth as Holmes lay back in the shadows, playing his beloved violin. And then, Mr. Bartell, as so often happened, there'd be a violent jangle on our doorbell, and some wretched soul in misery would be standing before us and pouring out his troubles. Suddenly the violin would be discarded, and Holmes the dreamer would become Holmes the man of action. Come, Watson, the game's afoot, he'd say. And in a few moments later, we'd be rattling off in a cab through the foggy, gaslit London streets.
Yes, Doctor, I can imagine it was pretty hard for you to leave Baker Street.
It was, Mr. Bartell. However, as it transpired, there was one more adventure awaiting us before we left. A few days before the actual move, I persuaded Holmes to take an afternoon off from his packing and accompany me on a visit to the laboratory of an old friend of mine, a Professor Jean Boulin. He was an eminent French scientist engaged in very important work at the London University. Oh, by the way, this was at a period, Mr. Bartell, when radium was something extremely new and extremely rare. The university had just acquired a minute but invaluable portion of the element, and Professor Boulin was in charge of the research connected with it. I can remember the picture so well as Holmes stood in the laboratory, talking with keen interest to the distinguished scientist.
Amazing, Professor Boulin. Quite amazing. Think that this tiny leaden vessel contains one of the most precious substances in the world.
Yes, Mr. Holmes. We have a great deal to thank Madame Curie for. This new element may force us entirely to revise our concepts of all physical structure.
Your research is a great responsibility, Boulin.
It is, Watson. So I must confess that I wish the authorities here would give me a freer hand. I foresee such infinite possibilities in the use, particularly the medical use of radium. But my conservative superiors seem to regard it only as a toy, a scientific curiosity.
Limit your experiments accordingly, I suppose.
Exactly. I'm given no opportunity to do anything that's in the least radical.
Must be very disheartening. How can research ever get anywhere along those lines?
It is a great misfortune, Holmes, that you've determined to retire to your bee farm. This project we could use such an analytical mind as yours.
You flatter me, Professor.
How many assistants do you have working with you, Boulin?
3, but none of them are very inspired, I'm afraid.
What?
My best assistant is a man named Barker. He's a little on the conservative side, too. But he is extremely adroit. The other 2, a young man called Taylor and the girl Gladys Hughes. They mean well. But gauche, I fear, is the only word to describe them.
Why do you laugh?
I was just amused to observe that in describing my assistants, I chanced to be literal as well as figurative. It's odd that random symbolism can sometime... but never mind that. You would like to see the rest of the laboratory?
Yes, indeed we would.
Thank you very much.
I have some extraordinarily interesting photographic plates that record the emanations of radium. They're over here. I think you will find them most fascinating.
Baker Street, particularly when our rooms are full of packing cases, seems rather drab after the scientific stimulations of Professor Boulin's laboratory, doesn't it, old chap?
Yes, it seemed drab even if we hadn't been to see him. I feel frightfully depressed, Holmes. I just don't know what I'm going to do without you.
Oh, you're still a young man, Watson, and a susceptible one. You'll marry again.
No, I won't.
Yes, you will, old chap. And you'll end up by being glad that your old roommate, your difficult, rather unsociable old roommate, is living in retirement on the Sussex Downs.
Rubbish. I shan't feel anything of the kind. In any case, I don't think you'll be able to stay in retirement for long. Your mind is much too alert to be satisfied by being a sort of midwife to a bunch of beastly bees.
Oh, dear Watson. I feel that you'll never eat honey again.
Yes, you can laugh, Holmes, but I could see how excited you were when Boulin suggested that you might help him with his radium experiments.
Flattering suggestion, I must admit, my dear fellow. Just the same, Now, who the devil's that?
From the urgency of the tug on the bell pull, I'd say that it was a client.
And go and head him off, will you, old chap?
Yes, I'll do my best.
Oh, Watson, explain that I'm no longer in practice.
Too late, Holmes. He's brushed past Mrs. Hudson. Here he comes rushing up the stairs.
Oh, confound it.
I beg your pardon, sir.
You
but,
Mr. Sherlock Holmes?
No, I am not Sherlock.
Then you must be Mr. Holmes.
That is my name, sir. But may I ask what accounts for your rather whirlwind entrance? My housekeeper, Mrs. Hudson...
I haven't any time to consider etiquette. My sister Gladys Hughes has vanished into thin air. You've got to find her for me, Mr. Holmes. I'll pay you any fee you name, but you've got to find her.
Mr. Hughes, I'm extremely sorry that your sister has vanished, but I'm afraid that I can do nothing to help you. I'm retiring. I'm giving up my practice.
If you won't help me, I'll go to someone who will.
That's exactly what I mean, sir. I suggest that you go to the police, or if you insist on a private investigator, I can strongly recommend Mr. Martin Hewitt. Yes. His address is 39 Pont Street, Knightsbridge.
Good day to you.
Good day, Mr. Hughes.
36 Pont Street, Knightsbridge. Mr. Martin.
Yes, I can understand his concern, but his manners leave a great deal to be desired.
Holmes. Gladys Hughes, his missing sister. That was the name of one of Professor Boulin's assistants, wasn't it?
True, old fellow, but it's probably only a coincidence.
What?
Both Christian and surnames are extremely common ones.
Well, I have a feeling that it may not be a coincidence.
Oh, come now, my dear fellow. Don't you try and embroil me in a fresh adventure. I've retired and I'm leaving for Sussex in a few days. And if any more clients come wrenching at my doorbell, I shall ignore them.
But, Mr. Holmes, you've got to help me. My son, Geoffrey Barker, has disappeared.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Barker, but I'm afraid I'm...
Holmes, Geoffrey Barker was the name of Professor Boulin's chief assistant.
Watson, please believe me when I say that I am not to be inveigled into any further... Mrs. Taylor, I'm sorry, but I can't help you.
Oh, but Mr. Holmes, it's my husband. He's disappeared. We've only been married 3 months, and now, it's terrible. I've been so worried ever since he started to work on that strange new radium with Professor Jean Boulin.
Holmes, you can't pretend it's coincidence any longer. Gladys Hughes, Geoffrey Barker, and now Taylor. The 3 assistants of Professor Boulin.
I know it, Watson. Mrs. Taylor, the moving van will be here tomorrow to take my things to Sussex. I shall follow them immediately. I have retired, madam. Do you understand that? Retired.
Yes, another telegram for you, Holmes.
That'll be the 4th today. Why won't Scotland Yard leave me alone?
Well, it's a pretty strange business. 3 people engaged in research of this new element radium have all disappeared within 48 hours. Scotland Yard needs your help.
Let them earn their salaries, my dear Watson. I've helped them for the last time. Well, let's see how they've couched their latest diffusion. Oh, this isn't from Scotland Yard. It's from my brother, Mycroft.
Mycroft? What's he going to say?
Listen to this. Now Professor Boulin has disappeared.
Great Scott.
And the radium with him. Surely the pattern is obvious, Sherlock. Radium must be found, could solve the problem for you, but I'm too lazy. Consider what a flashy case for you to retire on. Regards, Mycroft. The old devil.
Holmes, this is shocking. My old friend Boulin has disappeared.
Yes, Watson, and now my brother asks me to investigate. The pressure becomes irresistible. Very well. I bow to fate and postpone my retirement for a few hours.
Good man, Holmes. You know you'll never really retire.
You see, as Mycroft says, there's an obvious pattern in this case. Our first step, of course, will be to interview all the doctors who treat patients without charge.
Why?
Well, surely that's obvious.
Well, it isn't at all obvious to me. I don't know why you always leave me in the dark.
Well, what makes you laugh?
Being left in the dark. It's just like the old times, isn't it, Holmes? Come on, old fellow, let's go. The game's afoot. Dr. MacDonald, this is Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I'm very glad to meet you.
And are you, Dr. MacDonald?
I swear that I've never been in as many doctors' offices as I have today. But Mr. Holmes is in search of some information. Perhaps, Doctor, you can help him.
I'll do my best. What do you want to know, Mr. Holmes?
Whether you have any charity patients with skin eruptions or growths of any kind. I mean, patients that have not kept their appointments recently, perhaps.
Now, let me see. Why, yes, I do. Old Mrs. Pendle. She has a very bad case of lupus. She was due for a treatment here yesterday, and I've seen nothing of her.
Splendid. Can you give me her address?
Why, certainly. It's in my book here.
Well, I hope this isn't a false trail, Holmes.
We can only explore it and see, dear chap.
Here we are. Mrs. Pendle. 36 Elm Gardens, Clapham.
Mrs. Pendle, 36 Elm Gardens, Clapham. Thank you, Doctor. I'm greatly obliged to you. Getting restless, Watson?
Yes, I am a little. We've been waiting outside Mrs. Pendle's house for over an hour. Why don't we knock on the door? See if she's at home.
Oh, no, my dear chap. We mustn't frighten her. I hope that she's going to lead us to our quarry. You see...
Shh. Front door's opening. A woman's coming out.
Yes, it's Mrs. Pendle, beyond doubt. Look at that bandage around the upper part of her face.
Yeah, hello, she's turning down the street. We're going to follow her, I suppose.
Naturally, but let's give her a start, shall we? We don't want her to spot us.
Well, while we're waiting, perhaps you clear up 1 or 2 points for me. I'm still very much in the dark.
With pleasure, old chap. What puzzles you?
Well, one of the things that
Come on. Huh? We've given her enough of a start. Let's follow her.
Oh, very well, very well. But look here, Holmes. You asked me what I didn't understand. 2 things puzzle me. What did Mycroft mean by the pattern of the case? Why are we following a poor sick old lady through the London streets?
I'll answer the first question, and I think the answer to the second will be self-apparent. The pattern of the case is clear. Professor Boulin and his 3 assistants have vanished together with the radium, but their disappearances were not simultaneous. Had they been so, it would have been a transparent case of theft. But with the disappearances gradual rather than simultaneous, the emphasis has been subtly shifted.
Yes, I can see that, Holmes, but what do you suppose is at the back of the whole business? Can't be a simple case of theft. Radium is enormously valuable, but it'd be hard stuff to sell again.
Not to an unscrupulous criminal with a knowledge of medicine, Watson. My own theory, and I admit at the moment that it's purely a theory, is that Professor Boulin was worried because he was so hampered in his research. You'll remember that he stressed his great faith in the medical values of the new element, radium.
Yes, he did.
It's more than possible that he places the rights of science above the rights of property, that he's determined that he and his group will carry on their invaluable research unhampered by the conservative restraints of the university.
I see what you mean, Holmes, but how does Mrs. Pendle, the poor woman that we're following, enter the picture?
Because one of the chief lines of radium research on the continent so far has been with her sort of trouble. Professor Boulin's obvious move, if my theory is correct, would be to contact poverty-stricken patients, promise them relief, induce them to abandon their regular treatments, and submit to him.
By Jove, yes, Holmes, that seems perfectly logical, and yet I can't believe that Boulin would...
Mrs. Pendleton has reached her destination. She's turned down a driveway.
Yes, she's walking up to what looks like a deserted way.
Hurry, old chap. Don't let her out of our sight.
She's opened the door without knocking. She's gone in.
We'll wait here for a moment or 2, then we'll follow her. I have a feeling that your old friend, Professor Boulin, is not far away, Watson.
Yes, you're probably right. But I hope we can do something to protect him from the consequences of what he's done. It might easily mean the finish of a brilliant career.
I'll do everything in my power, but you know as well as I do...
Look. Mrs. Pendle's coming out again.
Yes, and she's in trouble. Come on. Mrs. Pendle, what's wrong?
I don't know how you know my name or who you be, but you asked me what's wrong. They tell me to come here to this address, and I find a doctor who'd help my face. I comes here, and what do I find?
What did you find, madam?
A corpse, sir. That's what I find. A dead man lying there in a great pool of his own blood.
You'll hear the rest of Dr. Watson's story in just a second. So I'm just going to remind you that there's one wine which everyone likes and which is good on any occasion. Petri California Sherry. You want a swell wine to serve before dinner? The perfect answer is Petri Sherry. If you want a wine that's delicious after dinner, or later in the evening when you're just talking things over with your friends, again you want Petri Sherry. And if you want a wonderful wine to serve at cocktail time, naturally you want Petri Sherry. Sherry is a wine that's good at any time. And Petri, well, Petri is the wine that's good all the time. Well, Dr. Watson, so following the tracks of old Mrs. Pendle led you to a corpse, huh?
Yes, Mr. Bartell. Of course, Sherlock Holmes and I went at once into the broken-down warehouse to examine the scene of the tragedy. Slumped over a desk in a darkened, shabby room, a flickering candle giving a macabre lighting to the scene, was the body of a man. I think I knew its identity even before Holmes turned to me.
Professor Boulin. All right, Watson.
Poor devil. Murdered, of course.
Yes, but examine him for yourself, will you?
Yes. Yes, there's no doubt about it. This wound couldn't have been self-inflicted. The right auricle of the heart has been pierced.
How long ago would you estimate death took place?
Not more than a couple of hours ago, I should say.
Not hard to reconstruct the killing. The murderer came up from behind Boulin as he sat here, crooked an arm around his throat. Yes. See the finger marks on the right-hand side of the neck? Here? Then stabbed him in the chest.
And then withdrew the weapon and disappeared.
Leaving no traces, confound it. A dusty room is an ideal place for recording footprints, but there are half a dozen different prints here, including Mrs. Pendle's. Hello. Here's the print of a smaller woman's shoe.
Well, must be that of Gladys Hughes, his assistant.
Undoubtedly, but that really proves nothing except that she was here with him. A fact that we were convinced of anyway. Question is, come on, let's go outside and talk to Mrs. Pendle again.
Poor old Boulin. What a shocking way to die.
And what a great loss to science.
I suppose the murderer must have stolen the radium. We found no trace of it in there.
Undoubtedly, the possession of the radium was the motive for the murder. Mrs. Pendle.
The poor man is dead, ain't he, sir?
I'm afraid so, madam.
I knew it. I never should have come here. I never should have left Dr. MacDonald.
Mrs. Pendle, let me ask you a question.
I can't be answering no questions, sir. I don't know nothing about how the poor soul got himself murdered. What would a poor woman like me know about such things?
No, my good woman. My friend isn't suggesting at all that you know anything about the murder.
Then what do you want to know, sir?
Who told you to come to this address today, Mrs. Pendle?
A young lady. Nice young lady she was, too. She met me coming out of Dr. MacDonald's yesterday and told me that if I come here today, I'd find a doctor who could cure me.
That was obviously Miss Hughes. Holmes, I believe that your theory was right.
Come on, Mrs. Pendle. We'll escort you to the nearest police station where you can report the murder.
Yes, sir.
And then, Watson, we must keep on the track of the radium. That, perhaps, is more important than any life.
Well, how are we going to do that? We haven't a clue to go on.
Remember that Professor Boulin's 3 assistants are still missing. We must go to the homes of each of them and see what can be found out. Mr. Hughes, you must realize by now that your sister's disappearance is part of something vastly more significant than you think. I must ask you in the
My
first...
sister didn't disappear.
What do you mean, sir? You came to us and said that you had.
Oh, it was all a mistake, gentlemen. She came back today. She'd just been down to the seaside for a short rest, and she'd forgotten to let me know. I'm sorry to have bothered you.
May I see your sister at once, please?
I'm sorry, Mr. Holmes, but she's out just now. I don't know where she's gone or what time she'll be back.
Mrs. Barker, I've come to you about your son's disappearance. I'm afraid that...
but my son didn't disappear, Mr. Holmes. It was all a misunderstanding. He came home today.
Then may we speak to him, please, Mrs. Barker?
Oh, I'm afraid that's impossible. You see, he...
Mrs. Taylor, I want to talk to you about your husband's disappearance.
Oh, that. He came home this afternoon, Mr. Holmes. At first I was so suspicious, but when he explained, well, I'm sure you know how it is in the first few months of marriage. Those little tears.
Confound it, Watson. We're no nearer the solution.
And meanwhile, here we are back in Baker Street to find that the moving van has taken all your things off to Sussex. Perhaps you should give up the case, Holmes, and follow them.
Close my career on a note of failure? No, my dear fellow. I shall not leave London until this problem is solved.
In that case, I'll sit down. Looks to me as if it may prove a lengthy wait.
I've rarely felt more frustrated, Watson. All 3 vanished technicians home safely with plausible stories, or at least plausible alibis. And poor Boulin murdered, the radium stolen.
Well, I must say it makes no sense to me.
Well, it must make sense. The pattern was well enough to find in the beginning. It's just a question of finding the right key. In a way, it's clear enough what's happened. One of the 3 assistants, placing the financial value of radium above its value to science, murdered Boulin to obtain the prize. The other 2, fearing that their complicity in the original plot would involve them as accomplices in murder, ran home and established an alibi.
And the murderer did the same thing, for it's obvious one of the 3 must be the killer and the thief.
Yes, the question is, which one of the 3 is the culprit?
If only poor Boulin were alive, he could help us.
My dear chap, if Boulin were alive, there would be no murderer.
Oh, of course it would.
Now, let's see. Boulin gave us a few bare facts about his 3 assistants. I wonder... But of course, Watson! I have the answer. The case is solved.
What do you mean, Holmes? How can it be solved? You haven't done enough investigation. If it comes to that, you haven't even seen any of your 3 suspects.
That isn't necessary.
Oh, you know who did it?
Yes, Watson, and so should you.
But we know nothing to set them apart from each other, except that one of them's a girl.
We know more than that, my dear fellow. Think hard.
Well, Boulin told us that Geoffrey Barker was an excellent technician, while the other 2 were somewhat clumsy.
We know even more than that.
Well, that's if I know what, Holmes.
I shan't even need to stay in London and follow the case through to its logical conclusion. A telegraph to Mycroft and another to Scotland Yard to take care of it, yes. And I can be in Sussex before the moving van after all.
You mean you're going now before the case is solved?
But it is solved, my dear fellow. All that remains to be done is some purely routine work. What's the time?
Look, it's 3 o'clock.
Splendid. If we hurry, we can catch the 3:45 express from Waterloo.
We?
Yes, I was counting on you spending a few days down there with me, old chap. I hope you can spare the time. I should hate to make so drastic a change without my good old friend Watson at my side.
Oh, of course. I'll be delighted, but...
But what, my dear boy?
The case of the disappearing scientists.
Wait until we get to Sussex, shall we? As soon as I get an answer to my telegrams, I'll explain the whole thing to you. And now let's hurry, shall we? Our train leaves in 40 minutes. More tea, Watson?
Thanks, old boy.
Peaceful down here, isn't it?
Extremely. At the moment, I must confess I find it rather nerve-wracking.
Oh, why?
Well, you know why, Holmes. I want you to open that telegram and tell me if your solution to the Boulin case was the correct one.
Very well, my dear chap. Let's see. What is it? It's from Mycroft. Listen. Murderer arrested and radium recovered. Well done, Sherlock, though you took longer than I expected. Regards, Mycroft.
Congratulations, Holmes. And now perhaps you'll condescend to tell me how you solved it.
Don't be angry with me, old chap. I only wanted to make sure that my solution was correct. You remember the nature of the fatal wound on Boulin's body?
Of course. He'd been stabbed through the right auricle of the heart.
From behind, proving that the murderer was clearly right-handed.
Oh, what does that signify? Almost everybody's right-handed.
Oh, no, not in this case. If you recall, Professor Boulin said that Geoffrey Barker was adroit, while his other 2 assistants were gauche. Then he laughed because he said his remark was true both literally and figuratively.
I still don't see what you're talking about.
Oh, come now, Watson, come. Think of the origin of the word adroit. Ardois. Droit is the French word for right.
And gauche is the word for left.
Meaning the 2 gauche assistants were left-handed, and therefore only the adroit, the right-handed Barker, could have inflicted the fatal wound.
I see it now, Holmes. You know, if you'd remembered that mark of Boulin's at the time we found his body, you could have solved the case much sooner.
True, old fellow, very true. And when my old friend Watson points out that my memory is failing and my mind sluggish, then I know that my retirement has been postponed for far too long.
Well, so Holmes really went through with his idea of becoming a bee farmer.
Yes, of course. It became one of his favorite hobbies. Do you know anything about the raising of bees?
Oh, nothing at all. The only connection I've ever had with bees was very remote. Once I had the hives.
Once you had the... Oh, no, Mr. Barker.
Oh, yes, Dr. Watson. But seriously, I do know one thing about bees. Even when you know all about them, you're apt to get stung.
That's true enough.
So I'll make my hobby Petri wine. You know, you can't miss when you buy Petri wine, because Petri wine is always good wine. The Petri family has been making fine wine for generations. In fact, they started way back in the 1800s. And they've handed on down from father to son, the knowledge and experience absolutely essential to the making of truly fine wine. And since the making of Petri wine is a family affair, you can be sure that the name Petri means something on a bottle of wine. Those letters P-E-T-R-I are more than a trademark. They're the personal assurance of the Petri family that every drop of Petri wine is good wine. So when you buy wine of any type, you can put your faith in the Petri label, because Petri took time to bring you good wine. Well, Dr. Watson, what new Sherlock Holmes story are you going to tell us next week?
Well, now, let me see. Next week, Mr. Bartell, I'm going to tell you about one of the weirdest adventures that Holmes and I ever had. It concerns a haunted chapel in the wilds of Cornwall, strange organ music that played at midnight, and the headless ghost of a murdered monk.
Tonight's Sherlock Holmes adventure was written by Dennis Green and Anthony Boucher and was suggested by an incident in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's story, The Reigate Puzzle. Music is by Dean Fossler. Mr. Rathbone appears through the courtesy of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and Mr. Bruce through the courtesy of Universal Pictures, where they are now starring in the Sherlock Holmes series. The Petri Wine Company of San Francisco, California, invites you to tune in again next week, same time, same station. Sherlock Holmes comes to you from our Hollywood studios. This is Harry Bartell saying goodnight for the Petri family. Petri Wine brings you Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce in the new adventures of Sherlock Holmes. The Petri family, the family that took time to bring you good wine, invites you to listen to Dr. Watson tell us another exciting adventure he shared with his old friend, that master detective, Sherlock Holmes. And as for me, well, I'd like to tell you the easiest way I know to get the reputation of being the perfect host. Next time friends come over for dinner, before you sit down to the table, serve glasses of Petri California Sherry. Petri Sherry is the best beginning a good meal ever had. I say Petri Sherry because Petri Sherry is extraordinary sherry. You can tell by looking at it. Hold it to the light. Notice how clear it is. Notice its beautiful deep amber color. And you can tell Petri Sherry is unusual from just a whiff of its fragrance. And, of course, in the last analysis, you can tell just how fine a wine Petri Sherry is by tasting it. That's the best test of all. And that's where you'll get the most pleasant surprise because Petri Sherry really tastes wonderful. A flavor right from the heart of the grape. So serve Petri Sherry to your family and your friends, and serve it proudly, because the name Petri is the proudest name in the history of American wine. And now I'm sure our good friend Dr. Watson's expecting us. Let's not keep him waiting. Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening, Mr. Bartell. You'll forgive me if I don't get up, won't you, my boy?
Of course, Doctor. What's the matter, a touch of rheumatism?
No, I've played 18 holes of golf today.
I hope that when I'm your age, Doctor, I can be half as sprightly.
Oh, it's very nice of you, but if you don't mind, we won't discuss the question of my age. So drop your chair, make yourself comfortable. I'll get on with tonight's new Sherlock Holmes adventure.
Well, from the hint you gave us last week, it sounded like quite a spooky story.
It was, Mr. Bartell. It certainly was. Towards the end of November in the year 1895, a dense yellow fog had settled down over London. For 4 or 5 days, it was impossible from our rooms in Baker Street to see the outline of the houses opposite.
A real London pea souper, huh, Doctor?
Yes, my boy, and it became most depressing. The first day, Holmes had spent in cross-indexing his huge book of criminal references. The second and third had been patiently occupied with a subject which he had recently made his hobby, the music of the Middle Ages. But when on the fourth day, on pushing back our chairs after breakfast, we saw the greasy, heavy brown swirl still drifting past us and condensing in oily drops upon the window panes, Sherlock Holmes' impatient and active nature could endure this drab existence no longer. He paced restlessly about our sitting room, chafing against the inaction. After several minutes of these perambulations, he turned to me and spoke.
Anything of interest in the paper, Watson?
News of a revolution, possible war, and of an impending change in the government. Nothing to interest you, though. No crimes of any importance.
The London criminal is certainly a dull and unenterprising fellow these days. Look out of the window, Watson. See how the figures loom up, are dimly seen and then blend once more into the foggy depths. What a day for a thief or a murderer. He could roam London as the tiger does the jungle, unseen until he pounces, and then evident only to his victim.
That's a cheerful thought, I must say. Hello. I wonder who that is.
Probably a visitor for Mrs. Hudson, or perhaps the local plumber has finally condescended to pay some attention to the faulty gas jet in our hallway.
I don't think you're right on either count. I can hear Mrs. Hudson's footsteps on the stairs.
Come in. Come in. Yes, Mrs. Hudson, what is it?
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Holmes, but there's a gentleman to see you. Says it's most important, and he asked me to give you this card.
Oh, thank you. Oh, Mortimer Harley, eh? Show him up, please, Mrs. Hudson.
Very good.
Mortimer Harley, and who's he?
I've not had the pleasure of meeting him personally, but I'm quite familiar with his scientific reputation.
Scientific? In what does he specialize?
Oh, I suppose one might refer to him as one of the greatest authorities on all matters connected with the occult.
You mean the fellow dabbles in supernatural stuff and all that sort of thing?
I mean, my dear Watson, that Mortimer Harley is an extremely intelligent man with a thoroughly comprehensive and scholarly knowledge of his field and an intense belief in the existence of the supernatural force. Here he is to speak for himself. Oh, come in, Harley. Thank you, Mrs. Hudson.
You're Mr. Sherlock Holmes?
Yes, sir. This is my colleague, Dr. Watson.
How do you do, Mr. Harley?
How do you do, Doctor?
Won't you sit down, sir?
Thank you. Well, you fellas are probably wondering who I am and what's brought me here.
Well, we're not wondering who you are, Mr. Harley. My friend Holmes is just telling me of your scientific eminence.
I'm flattered that you know of me, Holmes. Just the same, you're wondering why I'm here.
Naturally, sir.
Well, since you know I'm a student of the occult, I'll get right down to my problem. Mr. Holmes, have you ever heard of the Headless Monk of Trevennis Chapel?
Oh, yes, indeed, Mr. Harley. An apparition to be counted among our more intangible national treasures, I should say.
I'm sorry to appear stupid, but I have never heard of the Headless Monk of whatever it is, Chapel.
Well, then, let me tell you about it, Doctor.
Yes, I wish you would.
Trevennis Manor in Cornwall was once an abbey. It was expropriated during the reign of Henry VIII, and several of the monks were killed in some of the minor difficulties attendant on such an act. But one of the murdered monks, a certain Brother Hugh, the chapel organist, was persistent. He still haunts the chapel today. He still plays the organ, and since he was beheaded, he always appears headless.
Charming little legend, Mr. Harley, but you don't expect us to believe it's anything but a legend, surely.
Skeptic, eh? How about you, Mr. Holmes?
I'm extremely curious to know why you come to see me, Mr. Harley.
I'll tell you why. I have a rare opportunity to investigate the phenomena. You see, the son of an old friend of mine, a young fellow by the name of Leonard Miles, is secretary to the owner of Trevennis Manor. He asked me to stay there, and I find the invitation irresistible, particularly since the phenomena have curiously increased of late, Mr. Holmes, almost as though some more mortal agency were motivating them.
Oh. Now I see why you've come to me, Mr. Harley.
I knew you would, Holmes. You see, I'm like my good friend and fellow investigator, Carnacki. I believe in being prepared to meet phenomena on either the natural or the supernatural plane. If the phenomena are real, then they fall legitimately in my field.
Whereas if, as I'm sure you suspect, they are being contrived by human forces, then you think that's more in my department, eh, Harley?
Exactly.
Well, what do you say, Holmes? A little trip to Cornwall would be a nice few days. We'd probably escape the fog down there.
Oh, that place is with the weather, Watson.
What?
I'm much more concerned with the fog that surrounds the appearances of the Headless Monk of Trevennis Chapel. And Mr. Harley, I accept your invitation with pleasure. There's still time to catch the Cornish Express. We can be at Trevennis Manor before the moon is up.
Hello? Who's this funny-looking fellow coming down the steps towards us?
If I didn't hear the sound of his footsteps, I'd believe it was a psychic manifestation. He certainly looks as if he came from beyond the grave.
Who be ye, gentlemen? Where be ye going?
Well, supposing you tell us who you are first, my good man.
Who be I? I be David Pendragon, sir. That's who I be. Stable hand here at the manor. And I ask you gentlemen again where you be going.
We're staying at the manor, and we're just going to take a look at the chapel.
Oh, don't he do that, sir. People that go in there don't often come out the way they go in, sir. Don't he do it, gentlemen?
What are you talking about, my good fellow?
I be talking about the ghoulies and the ghosties and the organ music that comes out of the nowhere.
You heard it?
Of course I heard it, sir. Just like I seen the poor monk walking around without his head on.
Take us into the chapel, will you? And show us where you saw the figure.
That I will not, sir. Not for all the gold in Port Call will I go back and chance seeing the poor lost soul wandering about without his head on. You gentlemen know what's good for ye. You'll not go in there either. Mark my words. Don't he go in that chapel.
Extraordinary chap. Seems really frightened of the place.
Yes, but it's more than blind superstition that accounts for his reluctance. Let's go in, shall we?
Well, I suppose it's all right.
Great Scott. Listen to that. The organ. The ghost playing.
We're extremely fortunate. fortunate. A psychic manifestation as soon as we enter. Remarkable.
Psychic manifestation rubbish. Look who's sitting at the keyboard. It's Holmes. Holmes? What's the matter, Watson? What's the matter? You frightened us to death, didn't he, Holly?
Well, speaking for myself, Doctor, it disappointed me. I thought it was a genuine phenomenon.
What do you think you're doing, Holmes? I thought you were still behind us.
I'm sorry if I frightened you, Watson. I was curious about this organ. I slipped in by the side door ahead of you and tested the instrument. It's in astonishingly good condition for a disused chapel, don't you think, Harley?
Yes, I do, Holmes.
One might reasonably presume that someone tends it with great care. In fact, I would go further and say...
What are you doing in here?
We are guests at the manor house, and we decided to pay a visit to the chapel before we paid our respects to our host.
Oh, my father is your host. I'm Dorothy Brownlee.
How do you do, Dorothy? My name is Holmes, and these gentlemen are Dr. Watson and Mr. Harley.
How do you do, Dr. Watson? Mr. Harley. I heard the organ music, and I was terribly frightened. You've heard of the legend, I suppose.
You mean about the headless monk and the ghostly organ and music, Miss Brownlee?
Yes, Doctor. And it's more than a legend, I assure you. That's why I rushed over here as soon as I heard it. It must have frightened all the servants within hearing distance. Why were you playing the organ?
I was curious to see whether it was in good repair.
Obviously it is, Mr. Holmes. Well, my father and his secretary, Mr. Miles, are expecting you, I know. Let's walk over to the house, shall we? I'm sure you've seen enough of the chapel for tonight. Father, this is Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson.
How do you do?
How do you do, sir?
How do you do? This is my secretary, Leonard Miles.
How do you do, Mr. Miles?
Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson. I'm afraid Mr. Brownlee is rather angry with me. I hadn't told him that you were an expert on psychic phenomena, Mr. Harley.
I fail to see why the knowledge of that fact would make you angry, Mr. Brownlee.
I don't want you ferreting about into this so-called ghost business. There's been enough trouble in the neighborhood already. It's almost impossible to keep servants, and these Cornish people are incredibly superstitious.
You haven't seen the ghost yourself, Mr. Brownlee?
Oh, of course not. There isn't any ghost, I tell you.
You heard the mysterious organ playing?
No, I haven't. And I don't want to talk about it anymore. Yes, what is it?
David Pendragon at the door. He's very anxious to see you, sir.
Pendragon? Oh, very well. Tell him to come in.
Yes.
David? What does he want, I wonder?
That's the fellow we met outside the chapel, isn't it?
Yes. Quite a colourful character.
He's a superstitious old fool, if you ask me. But he is a good groom. Yes, Pendragon, what is it?
Begging your pardon, sir, but there be trouble at the chapel again tonight. I says to myself, David, 'tis your duty to go to the master, I says.
Never mind. What's the trouble?
As the moon was hanging low tonight, sir, I hears the organ a-playing.
But that was Mr. Holmes, my good man.
Aye, that's what he thinks, maybe. But what I says to myself is, what made him play the organ? Then this very night, I saw the headless monk. With my own eyes, I saw that poor soul with his head off, wandering in the moonlight. I saw that, sir, with my own eyes, I did.
Oh, get out of here, you blithering old fool. And I'm warning you, if I hear any more nonsense about this ghost, you'll lose your job, you understand? Now, come along, be off with you.
Aye, sir, begging your pardon, sir.
Come on, I'll give you chaps a drink.
Mr. Brownlee seems absolutely rabid on the subject of the ghost, eh?
Yes. Suspiciously so. What about he's trying to hide?
Whatever it is, I don't think he'll be successful. In your profession, Holmes, you know that murder will out. It's true in my profession also. Try to suppress them as you may, gentlemen. Ghosts will out.
Well, Holmes, this place may be haunted, but I swear that I never spent a better night anywhere.
Good morning, Mr. Harley.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Good morning.
I'm glad to see I'm not the only late riser.
Oh, were you up late too, sir?
Yes, I was, Doctor. I decided to ignore the veiled threats of Mr. Brownlee, and so I did a little investigating in the chapel. Do you mind passing the teapot?
And what were the results of your investigations, Mr. Harley?
Well, there was no psychic manifestation, you understand, but I'm sure of one thing. That chapel is evil. Evil to the hearts of its stones. And I'll swear that evil does not stem from the hapless monk who was murdered there.
You confirmed certain suspicions aroused by my own investigations last night. There is evil here, Mr. Harley, and I think I know its nature. Unless I mistake every sign and reaction, someone has been initiating the local peasantry into the evils of the Black Mass.
Black Mass? Good Lord, what a shocking thought.
My own sensations last night confirm your theory, Holmes. There is a coven here, I swear it, hiding its own obscene practices under cover of the haunting.
Well, that sounds quite feasible. After all, the people are so superstitious that they'd keep as far away as possible from the chapel when they heard the organ playing.
This problem falls into both our fields, Harley. The practice of black magic is a criminal offense.
Perhaps it's just as well the old laws against witchcraft are still in force.
I imagine, Mr. Harley, that you have your own methods of combating such forces as we're up against.
Oh, yes, Holmes, though mine are not connected with the legal aspects of the case.
May I ask what you plan to do, sir?
Well, I have several rather elaborate preparations to make, Doctor. It'll take me most of the day, I'm afraid. However, I shall explain them to you all after dinner tonight.
It's pleasant to sit here after a good dinner with a superb brandy at one's elbow and listen to the piano being so charmingly played.
You're very kind, Doctor.
Won't you play something more, Miss Brownlee?
I'd love to.
Are you enjoying your stay down here?
Oh, very much, thank you. Both Mr. Harley and I have found the local folklore extremely interesting.
I say, you fellows haven't been investigating the haunted chapel business again, have you?
Now, look here. If you have, I shall be very angry. It's abusing my hospitality. I told you distinctly I didn't want any more talk of ghosts.
We are not talking of ghosts, my dear Mr. Brownlee. I have something even more important that I must fight now. It's possibly a little hard to imagine me as a crusader. Me, the stooped little man, beside the four of you, as toweringly tall a quartet of men as I have ever faced. And yet, I am your St. George.
What on earth are you talking about, sir?
I'll tell you in secrecy. This mustn't reach the ears of the peasantry. I refer to myself as St. George because I go to wipe out an evil that lives in your midst, a living, modern dragon.
Please, Mr. Harley, that sounds dreadfully frightening.
And to rid you all of this fiend, I must cleanse the chapel, purify it, exorcise it, remove its residue of psychic evil. That, gentlemen, is my mission tonight.
Dorothy!
She's fainted.
Get some smelling salts, quickly.
I'm afraid you were a little too graphic, Mr. Harley.
I'm sorry if I frightened the young lady, but I'm sure that after tonight she will have no further grounds for fear in Trevennis Manor.
Holmes? Yes, old chap?
Did you hear anything?
Nothing but the owls and the clock striking midnight.
I'm getting awfully jumpy. What do you suppose Harley's up to?
I can imagine his procedure. Midnight, the crucial hour, I suppose, in his endeavors. I wish him luck. My own plans are not nearly as clear, unfortunately. I sense a guiding force here, but I lack the clues.
There is something, Holmes. Listen.
Great heavens! It's the organ in the chapel.
And Harley's in there alone.
Not alone. Listen to the organ. Feeling forth its madness. Come on, Watson. Something has gone horribly wrong.
You'll hear the rest of Dr. Watson's story in just a second. You know, a moment ago I told you how much I thought you'd like Petri California Sherry. But I didn't tell you that Petri Sherry is the all-round, all-American wine. You can not only serve Petri Sherry before dinner, it's good after dinner, too. And, of course, later in the evening when you're listening to the radio with some friends, a glass of Petri Sherry is just the thing. And say, Petri makes two kinds of sherry, the regular and Petri Pale Dry. To make sure you get the one that you like best, do what I do. Don't buy one, buy two. But remember, always buy Petri. Dr. Watson, that was a heck of a place to break off your story.
Then let us continue it as speedily as possible, my boy. As soon as we heard that devilish organ music, Holmes and I rushed out of the house and raced in the moonlight down the path leading to the ruined chapel. By the time we reached the entrance, the organ music had ceased, and the tall, gangling figure of David Pendragon was standing in our path.
You gentlemen be wanting it this time of night.
What are you doing here?
I be here because the gentleman gave me 5 shillings to stand outside here and see that no one disturbed him. That's why I be here. And nobody did come or go. He still be there, he be.
But when you heard that organ music, why the devil didn't you go in?
Organ music? I heard no organ music,
come on,
sir.
Watson.
Great heavens. Look at him.
We're too late. Poor devil. A knife through his heart.
It's obvious who did it. That fellow Pendragon. I'll go and grab him before he gets away.
He's not our man. This murder was planned with devilish cunning.
The curious thing, there's no sign of a struggle at all. Looks he just stood here and allowed himself to be stabbed.
Are these chalk marks with which the body is surrounded? They're known as a pentagram, I believe. He thought it would protect him completely from the supernatural forces.
Poor chap. For once his researches went too far.
Yes, because they touched not on the supernatural, but upon natural evil. And remember, Watson, that only 3 people besides ourselves and David Pendragon knew of this vigil.
Yes, Brownlee, his daughter, and young Miles, the secretary.
Exactly. Go back to the house, will you? And bring them here. Perhaps we can lay a ghost by trapping a murderer.
And that's all I know, Mr. Holmes.
Well, you've not established much so far, Holmes. The 3 of them all swear they were asleep and that they didn't hear the organ.
Yes, and you can't prove otherwise.
I think I can prove that one of you was not only awake, but also murdered Mortimer Harley.
But why should any of us want the poor man dead,
In your
Mr. Holmes?
case, young lady, I confess that I find it hard to conceive a motive.
Implying that Mr. Brownlee and I might have one?
Well, Mr. Miles, you must admit that you're responsible for Mr. Harley coming here.
And you, Mr. Brownlee, must admit that you did everything in your power to prevent the dead man from carrying out his investigations. Why? What were you trying to hide?
Nothing. It's just that I wanted to sell the manor house. All this talk about ghosts was giving the place a bad name. And if it had gone on, I'd never have disposed of the property.
Well, speculation can get us nowhere. Let's get down to facts. Is there any other entrance to this chapel besides the 2 doors?
None.
Oh, there was an old smuggler's cave which came out near the organ lot, but Father had it bricked up some years ago.
I had to. The tourists kept crawling in.
Go and examine it, will you, Watson, old chap?
Right, you are, Holmes.
If you don't mind my saying so, Mr. Holmes, it seems obvious who did this murder.
You told us David Pendragon admitted that no one went in or out as he stood guard. He must have done it himself. Oh, the man's half-witted.
And superstitious. He might have killed Mr. Harley because he was attempting to interfere with a ghost.
And then played the organ to celebrate the occasion? I think you overestimate David Pendragon's capabilities, Miss Brownlee. Mr. Miles.
Yes, Mr. Holmes.
Pendragon is waiting outside. Would you be kind enough to ask him to come here for a moment, please?
Certainly.
What did you find out, Watson?
Well, it's easy to see where it was bricked up, but it's a solid wall now. No one could get in that way.
But if no one came in or out, who else could have killed Harley except Pendragon?
The ghost, or rather the person disguised as a ghost. The dead man expected a psychic manifestation. When he saw the supposed ghost coming towards him, he offered no resistance. He believed that the magical pentagram would protect him. Ah, there you are, David.
Aye, here I be, sir. But I don't know nothing more than what I told thee.
No, don't be frightened, Pendragon. All we want is the truth.
That's what I told thee, sir.
And tell us a little more, will you? When you said no one had entered the chapel tonight, you meant that no mortal man had entered, didn't you?
That I did, sir. But how could I say I'd seen the ghost when Mr. Brownlee here had told me I'd lose my job if I spoke of the ghost again?
Oh, now we're getting somewhere. So you did see the ghost?
That I did, sir. The poor soul walking through the moonlight with no head on his body.
You saw it quite clearly?
Just as clearly as I sees you now, sir.
How tall was he?
He was... Would you mind standing against the wall, sir?
Yes, of course.
He was as tall as... Well, his shoulders come to just where your shoulders come now, sir.
You're a tall man, then, so we narrow it down to either you, Mr. Brownlee, or you, Mr. Miles.
This is utterly ridiculous.
Of course it is.
On the contrary, gentlemen, the case is solved.
Which one of them was it, Holmes?
Neither. Remember that the ghost is headless. That means that the impostor must have built up fake shoulders covering the head. On either of these men, it would have brought their shoulders to the level of my head.
Great Scott, it was...
Bravo, Mr. Holmes. I didn't think you'd catch me.
Dorothy! No, I don't believe
Miss Brownlee, I must warn you that...
Keep back. Don't any of you come near me. As you see, I have a revolver.
Dorothy, for heaven's sake!
Don't speak to me of heaven! You thought I was a sweet little girl, didn't you, Father? You didn't know your dear, demure daughter could murder a man, did you?
Why did you kill Mortimer Harley?
Because he was a meddler. For months I'd been practicing black magic here. For months I'd been building up the legend of the headless monk and the organ music. It made me so wonderfully alone, so gloriously free to practice the rites. And then he came here. I let him live that first night because I thought he was a fool. But on the second, when he said he was going to exorcise this chap, to purify it, as he said, he signed his death warrant. If you could have seen life into him.
Dorothy!
He bled so beautifully.
Holmes, she's mad as a hatter. What are we going to do?
Finally, give me that revolver.
And let you take me to prison or an asylum? No, you'll never catch me.
She's backing up the stairs leading to the organ loft.
Dorothy, come back!
Don't try and follow me.
Look out! The railing's behind you.
And turn my head. Oh, no, Mr. Holmes,
Dorothy! My poor little girl.
Mr. Brownlee, the powers of evil are frightening. Your daughter had killed one man and might have killed more. She was insane. Hopelessly insane.
Well, Doctor, that was quite an exciting story. You know, I wish I could play the organ and write music for it. There's nothing like music to really express a thought.
Yes, I can just imagine the kind of music you'd write. Probably catchy little ditties such as, "The Petri family took the time to bring you such good wine. So when you eat and when you drink, remember Petri wine."
Oh, no, Doctor. Is that the way I affect you? Although on the level, you could probably write beautiful music to describe the way the grapes look on the vine in the sunlight. But what music could tell you about the Petri family and how long they've been making fine wine? You know, the Petri family has been making wine for generations, handing on down from father to son, the knowledge necessary to transform luscious, sun-ripened California grapes into delicious, fragrant wine. And when you see that name Petri on a bottle of wine, remember, you're not looking at a mere trademark. That name Petri is the personal assurance of the Petri family that every drop of wine in that bottle meets their unusually high standard. Petri wine is always good wine. It's got to be, because Petri took time to bring you good wine. Well, Dr. Watson, what new Sherlock Holmes adventure do you have lined up for us next week?
Well, now, let me think. Next week, Mr. Bartell, I'm going to tell you a story that started quietly enough as Holmes and I sat at a London dinner party, and yet, before the evening was over, we found ourselves involved in one of the most shocking scandals that ever rocked London society.
Tonight's Sherlock Holmes adventure was written by Dennis Green and Anthony Boucher and was suggested by an incident in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's story, The Adventure of the Devil's Foot. Music is by Dean Fossler. Mr. Rathbone appears through the courtesy of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and Mr. Bruce through the courtesy of Universal Pictures, where they are now starring in the Sherlock Holmes series. The Petri Wine Company of San Francisco, California, invites you to tune in again next week, same time, same station. Sherlock Holmes comes to you from our Hollywood studio. This is Harry Bartell saying good night for the Petri family. This is the Mutual Broadcasting System.